did you come to India? Why did you come to India? Somehow I feel like if you put aside, when we focus more on the negatives, then our whole mind isn't on the negatives. But personally, see, about South Africa, I do definitely enjoy, less population and all of that is great. Of course, it's great.
Yeah.
But about India, what I love the most is, especially living in Delhi, I'm not sure how it is in smaller places, but it's so very convenient. Also, the cost of living here is just so ridiculously reasonable,
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Desi Return. Today, I'm really excited to have Richa on our show. Richa was born in Africa. She did her schooling in Africa, and she came to India for her undergrad in Bachelors of Arts, as well as after that, she finished her master's and she found her current husband. And after marriage, she has been living in India, and she's been in India for almost more than 7 years. I'm really excited to talk to Richa about few things, especially for someone who have studied abroad and how they want to do their bachelor's or master's in India, how the process is. So we can dive into a little bit more insights from Richa's journey and how the life has been for her, someone who spent her entire childhood in abroad, right? So really excited and looking forward to our discussion. With that, Richa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm more than happy to share whatever I have learned from my experiences. In case it can help anybody, that would be great.
Great. Thanks a lot, Richa. So why don't we start with a bit about your background, your schooling and what made you to move to India? I think that would be a good start.
Okay, so like you said, I grew up in South Africa, and my whole family is there. Even right now, my family is there. So I did my grade 1 to grade 12, obviously, and then from then I decided. So like I was telling you before this, was that I really always wanted to kind of like move away from home, majorly because I was almost like the only child, because my brother, I have an elder brother, and he was mostly at boarding school. So I also wanted to have a similar experience, and I always used to pester my parents that, send me off to boarding school as well. I also want to live that life. But then they always thought that we want at least one child at home. So after I finished my grade 12, I suggested to my parents that I should go to India for my studies. And I suggested India specifically because obviously we have Indian roots. My family and my parents are from Uttar Pradesh. And so I knew that there was no way they would discard this idea. My family are very deeply rooted in their Indian culture, and they've always tried to instill in the Indian culture within me and my brother. So when I suggested going to India for my studies, they were hands-on right from the get-go. I think my mother took a little bit of time, but my father was always hands-on, and he was like, you know what, go for it. So that's when when I started researching about universities in India that I can go to. I picked Banaras University specifically because my parents, again, thought it would be better for me to be in Uttar Pradesh, because in case something happens, blah, blah, it's always good to have family nearby. So that's when I also discovered that Banaras Hindu University is actually one of the top universities in India. And it also kind of receives a large international student base. I was surprised when I actually went there. Also, my concept or my idea of India was very different from what I experienced when I moved to India. I had not seen that many foreigners or that many international people, especially in a place like Varanasi, which is relatively smaller. So that's when I started applying. I got in touch with the International Center at Banaras Hindu University. I got in touch with the person who handles international applications. And I got to know the application dates and everything and the criteria. At that time, like I said, I did my bachelor's in arts. So the criteria was just to meet a minimum, I think, minimum percentage that I had to meet.
Okay.
It was also like a first come, first serve basis. I did apply in the foreign quota, which is, I think, Banaras University, they only have 10% or 15% quota for international students. And I think around 5% for NRIs. I'm not sure, but that is what it was when I was there. I was there from 2012 to 2017. So from bachelor's to my master's. So yeah, and then I applied, and then the wait began. They're very kind of, I wouldn't say slow, but yeah, they do take their own sweet time in kind of processing things. I always had to catch up. I always had to kind of call and follow up. Sometimes they answer, sometimes they don't. And yeah, I finally got my my acceptance letter. And then I made my way to Banaras University. Another struggle was to find accommodation. Also, I came at the peak of summer. So you were asking me about my experience having grown up in a different environment.
Yeah, maybe we
So
can jump on to that question. Sorry, like maybe I think we can go step by step if that's okay. So sounds like I think you have selected the place very strategically, like where the parents, family, and all that stuff. So maybe before we jump on to that, how was the life in South Africa? Like specifically like which country were you living before? How was the schooling there? How was the life? Maybe you can shed some light there, and then we can dive a little bit into this college process to get a little bit more color to that, if that's okay. Yeah.
okay, so South Africa is a country in Southern Africa. I was staying specifically in a suburban a place close to Pretoria, which is one of the capitals. South Africa has 3 capitals. And life was quite ordinary. It was so one of the culture shocks that somebody would get coming from a place like South Africa, which is heavily underpopulated, is coming directly to an overpopulated country. And also the weather surprisingly, a lot of people, especially here, I've seen that when they hear Africa, they think it's very hot, but it's actually not. So South Africa does not experience such extreme summer.
Okay.
So when I came, it was quite something that I had to absorb. My childhood was very normal. Just nuclear family,
Yeah.
parents working, my brother, myself, school, friends, the ordinary life that everybody experiences. So that's what my childhood was like.
So I think feeling a little bit about this university admission process, if that's okay, right? I think you mentioned about the criteria was a certain percentage in the grade 11 and grade 12. Are there any like exams? Like, I don't know, typically like when somebody is going abroad, there is like an SAT exam or, certain schools has their own kind of competitive exams for the admission process. Is there anything like that for Banaras University or for any other universities that you have considered? Or is just purely based on the grades? And also, like, do you have to get that certified in certain way because they would get it? What I'm trying to get it is, balance it out, like, because the marks from a different country is different. So how do they normalize it? Normalize is the word I'm like trying to. So if you can share a little bit about that, like, an exam and like, the grades that you got from another country, how did they normalize, or is there a process behind that?
So it was actually quite the opposite. When I brought my report cards from South Africa, there was no kind of conversion required. I just submitted my 10th and my 12th grade reports. But when I obtained my degree from here, I had to go to South Africa and get it like there's a board, we call it the SAQA, which is South African Qualifications Authority. So my BHU degrees had to be evaluated by SAQA to kind of understand the level of my study from India versus how it is in South Africa. But when I applied in Banaras University, there was no such process, especially at my time. I just submitted my grade 10 and my grade 12 certificate, which is in English, so it's kind of understandable. What else? What was the other question you asked?
Was there any like an exam?
Right. Right.
The process.
So exams and interviews, it kind of varies also from what country you're from and also the kind of course you're applying for. So I think for students from Nepal, we had a lot of students from Nepal. Also, their process was a bit different, if I remember correctly. I'm not quite sure what theirs was like, but for me, being from South Africa and also applying for a course as simple as a bachelor's in arts, there was not such a complicated process. We just had to meet a certain percentage that I mentioned beforehand. But I do know that some students who came in to study, they were in IIT BHU, who came in for engineering, or who came in for medicine. They did have to kind of give an exam, and they also kind of, I think there was one other criteria that they had to meet. So it depends on the course and also the country you're coming from. But if you're going for like regular courses like maybe BCom or like BA, BSc, then the criteria is a lot less challenging to meet.
Got it.
So,
okay. And then I think you mentioned, maybe approximately about 15% for the foreign quota, right? So just curious, like, is that completely utilized? Like, do you have all the seats are utilized by the foreign nationals, like for studying in Banaras University in your batch? Just curious on that.
So classes are conducted like they're combined classes.
Yes.
So it's international students have separate classes,
No,
but
no.
yes, I feel that it is properly utilized. Also remember that even students from neighboring countries are international students. So students from Nepal, from Bangladesh. So when I was there, we had a lot of students from Nepal. We had a lot of students from Bangladesh, from Sri Lanka.
Sure.
Many from Mauritius. Only after, I think, 2016, I saw a huge influx of African students. So also remember, so a lot of these students also come on a bursary. So what do you call it again? A student bursary, like the
like so they do like maybe some education in the like other country, and then like maybe a couple of years here. No.
What do you call it when the government is sponsoring the students?
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I think they call it SARS. So all the SARS countries, basically, there's a body where all the SARS countries kind of fall under this body. A scholarship, sorry. So
scholarship, yeah.
We call it bursary in South Africa. I was trying to find the right word.
Yeah.
So a scholarship, a lot of these students come in through scholarships, and they apply to India, and then through this body they are then allocated these universities, right? So maybe they give their preferences. Maybe they want, the first preference will be University of Delhi, second preference will be BHU, and depending on the availability of the seats in these universities, they would be placed in whatever university welcomes them.
Sure.
So after 2016, before 2016, I think I was the only South African student because I was self-financed. My parents were financing me. But after 2016, I saw a lot of African students who were on scholarship who came in from South Africa. We had like 4 or 5 new students from South Africa, from Zimbabwe, quite a few from Kenya, for different courses, different levels of studies, quite a few who were doing their PhD, a few were doing their masters. So yeah. Yeah, I think I lost track over there. What was the question?
Yeah, so sounds like I think there is no specific examination. It's I think it varies from the course that they're planning to join, and also sounds like I think there are quite a lot of foreign students who join these courses. I think there is quite a good demand from neighboring countries and from even some of the nationals doing as a scholarship. So I think
one thing I remember that all international students had to do was to submit a HIV test report, which was something that was a standard requirement for all students. So after you get enrolled and after when you are processing everything, you do also need to submit a AIDS negative report.
Got it. Cool. And so how was the education? Just curious. So somebody who, studied until grade 12 in South Africa, I don't know what kind of board it is, and how was the studies, like the teaching methodology or the experience in the university in India?
Very different. Very, very different. So in South Africa, it was mostly checking your knowledge, irrespective of how you communicate your knowledge. So if I'm writing an exam, say for example, if I'm explaining myself in a way that was not explained in class, I'd get like less marks in BHU. So and also it depends on the length of your answer. So I can ramble on for a page, just because it's like 5 marks, or I could just put it in bullet points, then I would not get the marks. So if I'm like crisp and I answer everything in a short paragraph, then that's not going to work. It took me a while to understand that, also because I didn't have a very helpful friends in the beginning, so it was a challenge. Also, one more thing remind me to come to, which was a huge challenge for me. But anyway, yeah, so if it's like a 5-mark question, I have to like write like maybe 2 long pages just to answer those 5, which I can easily do in like a paragraph. So that was a different thing that kind of took me by surprise, took me quite a bit to get used to. I used to not get very good marks in the beginning because I did not understand the kind of answers they were looking for. I would just straight dive into the answering and just give the answer. Then somebody introduced me to guidebooks, somebody introduced me to various resources, and I started understanding how they assess you as a student. And then it was more like answering for the teacher instead of answering for the teacher to check my knowledge.
Yeah.
So that's what. Also, one more thing, very important thing that I think I need to share. So when I came for my counseling session, so I did my major in English literature, right? So Banaras Hindu University has this rule. I don't know if it still exists, but at that time, so since English was my major subject, they have this rule that you have to pick one language subject irrespective of whatever subjects you have. But whatever, so if you are majoring in a language, then you cannot pick that language. So if I'm majoring in English literature, I cannot go for English language. And coming from South Africa, I did not know Hindi.
Yeah.
I do speak very fluent Hindi, but I don't know how to read and write Hindi, right? So when I came for my counseling, they suggested that I go for Bengali because they start teaching Bengali from the alphabets as opposed to Hindi, then they just dive into literature. So I, having no clue whatsoever about Bengali, I went ahead and picked Bengali, and it was the toughest 3 years of my life because if you fail your subject, your language subject, then you fail your year or your semester. So that was a very challenging thing but thankfully my professor at the time was very understanding. I remember having a breakdown in class because I think I flunked one semester, and I was just so frustrated because I never found the time to study for my main subject, because all the time I'm busy trying to understand Bengali, and I'm trying to understand just so I can pass my semester. But thankfully she was very supportive, and thankfully she understood my situation and she kind of pushed me through.
No, thanks for sharing that. I know that's like a very common question, even for kids who are age 10, right? How can my kid, cope up with a new language and so on. So it would be much more harder when you are 18 years or 17 years.
So what I used to do is that, so even our notes would be in Bengali language, and I could not read anything. And once I started understanding and reading, I still couldn't understand what I'm reading, right? Because I know how to read, but I don't know the language. So I'd ask somebody to read those notes for me, and then I'd write them in English.
Yeah.
And then when I'd study for them, I'd record myself saying those sentences, and then I'd try to memorize. So if there's a word that obviously I don't know what I'm reading, right? So I try to rhyme those words with another word from another language so that I can at least memorize those sentences and just go and write them in my exam. In fact, I used to study for Bengali only enough to pass. So I'd like for the question paper, I'm like, okay, 25-mark question. Now I'm okay. 50% I'll get, and then I'll just pass. And then the rest of the paper I'll just leave because I don't understand anything.
Yeah. So how was the life as a student in India? I think, the 5 years with the bachelors and masters in general overall. Yeah.
So the first few months was definitely tough because Banaras gets very hot and humid, right? And I had a very tough time adjusting to the crowd, the pollution and all of that initially. In fact, at one point I even called my parents and I was like, you know what, I need to come back now. I think I'm done. But what helped me was that the academic year in South Africa starts in January, and in India it starts in June, July. So I had 6 months, right? And my parents had already paid for everything. I had already had everything. So even if I wanted to go back, my dad suggested that, you know what, even if you come back, you will still be doing nothing until January. So why don't you just sit it out until January? If you still feel like you want to come back, then obviously just come back.
Yeah.
And obviously, you start making new friends, you start enjoying the freedom. Is amazing because I come from strict parents. And I was like, yeah, this is great. I can do what I want, whatever I want. And then I made good friends, obviously. So yeah, it's also so I was staying in an international hostel. So all the students were international students. We shared the same pain, we shared the same happiness, we shared everything. So it's kind of like so when you feel like others around you are like similar to you, then it gets easier. I made some of my best friends in that phase of my life. So definitely one of the best phases of my life, definitely.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I know there was one thing that I forgot to ask. Maybe can you shed some light in terms of the fees, right? Someone who is a foreign citizen versus a Indian citizen. How is the fee structure? Anything that you can shed some light on that would be fantastic.
So the fees of international students is almost like twice, maybe thrice as much as Indian students. I remember having Indian friends and we would go to pay our fees every 6 months or every 3 months, if I remember. And where my hostel fees would be, I remember this one semester specifically because I received a receipt. I don't know, it's somehow imprinted in my head. I had paid, I think maybe 7,000, 8,000, and they had paid like maybe 500 or something like that.
Got it.
So it's a large difference, but also understand that the facilities that we had in our hostel was quite different. We didn't have facilities as such, but we were not told not to use certain things. So like for international hostels, they were not allowed to use coolers, they were not allowed to have even a kettle or maybe like an induction, whereas in our hostel we could use all of those things. So yeah, and so yeah, that's kind of like the difference in the fees. It's like twice, maybe thrice as much. Also, but it's still a government university, so it is relatively cheaper than private ones. I'm sure private universities, as an international student, it will be skyrocketing in terms of fees. But government universities are relatively cheaper. I know for Banaras University is definitely.
Great, thanks. So I think after your master's, so what happened next? So did you go back to South Africa, or did you work somewhere? So just, yeah, what happened, and then what brought you back to India? So if you can shed some light, that would be fantastic.
So after I completed my master's in June of 2017, and we were supposed to have our graduation day, what we call it convocation over here, but BHU somehow kept postponing it. I thought, okay, let me just wait for another month and then let me complete this whole thing, and then I don't have to come back. I'll just go back to South Africa and see what to do from there. Sure. But they kept postponing it, so I started working at an NGO, a school in Banaras, which kind of has these children from different phases of life. So I worked there for a bit. Also, again, it was very hot, so I could not complete that. So yeah, after a few months, they kind of announced that it's going to happen, I think in December or something, and it was June at that time. So I decided to go back to South Africa. And in that period, then our parents started talking to each other, and then we kind of started finalizing things. And I came back to India in November of 2017 for my convocation. And then I traveled in that period because obviously I was not working at that time. I was just at home, because at the back of my mind, I was like, you know what, I have to move back to India anyway if I'm getting married. So let me just start my career once I'm there. So I came back to India for my convocation, and in that period I traveled around. I went to Kerala, I went to Himachal, I went to different places, and then I went back to South Africa. And that's when we decided that, okay, now we are getting married. And then in June of 2018, I got engaged. We came back. So my entire family came to India. We had an engagement ceremony, and then I went back to South Africa. And then in February of 2019, the year COVID hit, we got married. And yeah, so since 2019, I've been permanently in India.
Great. So are you still in near Banaras, or like you're living in some other place in India now?
No. Yeah. I am living in New Delhi right now. I'm no longer in Banaras.
Okay.
So
cool. So how has the life been in India? Like, just maybe if you compare and contrast, like in South Africa, like, sounds like, pretty much more than half of your life in South Africa, and maybe give or take like, 12 years here in India, right? I think, what are the pros and cons? How is the life? What would you suggest for someone who was born and grown up in some other foreign country, but who are considering to move to India? Anything that you can share from that perspective?
I get this question quite a lot when people ask me, why did you come to India? Why did you come to India? Somehow I feel like if you put aside, when we focus more on the negatives, then our whole mind isn't on the negatives. But personally, see, about South Africa, I do definitely enjoy, less population and all of that is great. Of course, it's great. Yeah. But about India, what I love the most is, especially living in Delhi, I'm not sure how it is in smaller places, but it's so very convenient. Also, the cost of living here is just so ridiculously reasonable, for like, if I compare in South Africa, like, okay, So in South Africa, you don't have all these apps that will deliver everything to your doorstep within like 10 minutes. You don't have all these facilities. So in terms of like technology and advancement, technological advancement, I'd say India is great. Also, it's very easy to kind of just get an auto rickshaw and go wherever. South Africa does not have a railway system. So everywhere you need to drive or just take a bus or a cab. And since it's such an underpopulated country, it takes sometimes an hour to fill a cab or like fill a bus. So in that sense, I do enjoy living in India a lot more, because also I feel a lot safer in India. One thing I'd like to touch on is that South Africa has a relatively higher crime rate, especially so if I coming from an Indian. So South Africa is also a rainbow nation. So we have different races. There's Indians, there's white people, there's black people, there's colored people. We call them colored people, but like mixed race people, right? So and the wealth disparity is also a lot. So like the white population, it's a lot wealthier than the black population, or like the Indian population is actually quite far well off than the other, so I stayed in a primarily black neighborhood, which was great because I grew up there. Everybody knew me, everybody knows my family. But if I had to get from my house to maybe Johannesburg, which is further away, I had to think twice, because my family would be like, no, there's no way you're taking a cab. We have to drive you everywhere. So that was a little bit of an inconvenience. If I'm in India or like if I'm in Delhi, I don't have to think twice if I want to go to Gurgaon or if I want to go to Noida. I just call an Ola or call an Uber, or I can just drive myself there. I don't have to think about safety in that much than I would have to in South Africa, because also I blend in, obviously, because I am Indian, so I don't really stand out. But in South Africa, like I said, I grew up in a black community. I do stand out, and it kind of does highlight you sometimes. So yeah.
Got it. Cool. Is there anything that we haven't touched base, or anything that you want to bring up to someone who is considering to move back to India, or having those thoughts? Yeah.
I would say pick your battles. I would say that, see, you'll if you're looking for negative things, you'll always find them. If you're looking for positive things, you'll find them. One thing, so I also run a YouTube channel. So I covered a video wherein I mentioned reasons to move to India. One of them was, if you are anywhere in the middle class category, life is very smooth. If you're living abroad, you don't have the luxury of house help. You don't have the luxury of certain things that you can easily find here. Like in South Africa, my mom is really struggling. She has health conditions, and still she has to like sweep the whole house. And even if she does find house help, it's like once a week, which is tough. So in India, you can get yourself a cook, you can get yourself house help. You're also generating employment, so you're kind of helping other people in need while you are also enjoying the luxuries of life. So yeah, pick your battles. You decide what matters more to you. Decide what, just pick your battles, I would say.
Got it. Cool. So yeah, thank you very much for your time and sharing a lot of insights. Especially we have had a lot of questions related to someone doing undergrad or masters here in India who have studied abroad. I think some of the information that you have shared would be very, very valuable. So really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your journey with us.
Thank you for having me, and this was long overdue. We've been trying to schedule this, but I'm really glad I did this. It was lovely talking to you too.
Yeah, great. Same here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you all for joining us on this insightful journey of Desi Return. If you enjoyed this episode and want to explore more stories and expert advice, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't forget to leave a comment below with your thoughts and experiences. By the way, check out the links in the description below for our Facebook group and social media for updates and engaging discussions, as well as connecting with fellow Desi Returners. Thank you once again, and until next time, may your Desi Return journey be filled with joy, growth, and endless possibilities.